IVM.
A board game doesn't always translate to a good video game. So when you have to think of when you're changing mediums so drastically, you have to be very careful on how you translate every element. So to do that in Shasan, like you rightly said, Shasan, the fundamental strength of the game is being able to look at your family members in the eye and talk about policy decisions while having this safe space of the game, saying, okay, I'm only saying this for the game, so don't feel bad. Creating that digitally is very, very difficult. So we're trying to work out different modules where conversations can happen, where people can build something that is meaningful at the end of the day, while still engaging in a more interpersonal space like through webcam.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. I have a question to all of you, especially those who are open about your political views and don't mind discussing them, whether it is the family dinner table or a gathering with friends or even on social media. How many times in the last 7 years have you felt frustrated that the conversation is becoming toxic and really not going anywhere near constructive? Well, I have a board game recommendation for you, and it is called Shasan. I've never been as excited about a board game since my parents got me my first Scrabble as I am about Shasan. It is a game where you are in the shoes of a politician and you are making decisions on ideology, and then you go on to play the game of winning as a politician, which of course involves things like creating vote banks, gerrymandering, and winning constituencies. You can win the game irrespective of your ideology, and the only question the game keeps asking you is, when the heat is on, what will you stand for? My guest is the creator of this game, Zain Memon himself, and I'm going to talk to him about how the idea of Shasan was born, which incidentally had something to do with what was happening at the Ram Leela Maidan in 2012, and how the idea moved into a successful board game. I also want to talk to Zain about Memesys Culture Lab, an organization that he co-founded along with Anand Gandhi, the famed director of Ship of Theseus, and many others. Besides Shasan, Memesys Culture Lab is also the home to The Extraordinary Documentary and Insignificant Man, films like Tumbad, and the web series OK Computer, and many more. Stay with us, and we'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast after this very short break. Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Zain. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? How's the pandemic treating you and everyone at home?
That's usually my first question to the guests, but no, man, it's been. I know we are recording this in early June, 8th of June to be precise. I think the last couple of months were pretty much hell at least as far as the national capital region goes. But I think we seem to be turning a corner. Generally, things seem to be getting better, but I think the price we've paid in the last couple of months is humongous. You'll probably realize it only in the coming days. How have you been?
They've been good. I live in Goa, so for the longest time, the pandemic didn't directly bother us. But everyone from every city made their way to Goa and bringing with them the virus. So
Yes.
there was a huge surge in cases. Multiple people from my team and my family, my housemates got hit with COVID. Everyone's fine now. Everyone's better. But the last 2 months, like you said, were roller coaster to be.
Yeah. You should also clarify for the audience that you are not the pandemic batch to Goa, and you actually moved to Goa much before that, right?
Yes. Yeah, we moved to Goa 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we realized that while we do work in media, a lot of our work happens in a silo where we just sit down and create. And at that point, we realized it doesn't make sense for us to pay the premium that Bombay demands. That's where we are from originally.
Right.
So we packed our bags 23 years ago and just moved to Goa, 30 of us.
Yes, and actually, that's a good place for us to start this conversation, Zain. You referred to we, and we here is Memesys, which is the organization which we'll talk about in just a second. But before that, for the benefit of the audience, tell us a little bit more about your growing up days. Where did you grow up? What kind of an early career did you have? What kind of early childhood did you have?
So I grew up in Warsaw in Bombay. That's where you find the capital for in the independent film industry in India right now. So I grew up there. Went to a small school down the road. Was always intrigued by a lot of things. I was lucky enough to be in this transition generation that lived offline for the first 12 years of our life, and then discovered the internet. So there was this, while we were native to the internet, we also knew its value. We also knew that the ability to answer any question at the tip of our fingers is something that's magical. That's something that cannot be taken for granted. And that just made me appreciate the vast learning resources that we can find online. And while I'm from Bombay, I grew up pretty much on the internet. Uh, I grew up talking to people from around the world, consuming culture from various corners that I perhaps may not have been able to consume otherwise, had I been born 5 years or 7 years earlier. And that really changed my perspective on things, that really changed my perspective on education and my perspective on what media can do for an individual. And that directly informed what I wanted to do for my career. I understood the power of story, understood the power of experience, understood the power of just knowledge systems and being able to learn something constantly. So I dropped out of school because school didn't excite me. By high school, I mean I finished my 12th, I didn't complete my graduation, and I started exploring my own journey. Like, what is it that I want to do, and what is it that I want to learn? Me and my friends realized that learning is not something that's going to end when we are 21, 22, and we have a degree in our hand. For our generation, learning is going to be persistent. Skilling up is something that you'll have to do on a weekly basis for the rest of our lives. And while that does seem daunting, it also has this great intrigue and excitement to it, because your career can change as and when you want it to, because you're not boxed into a corner. So I started with marketing for films in 2008. I was very young. I was 18, and I was just looking for some way to get into media. I started marketing for films as an intern.
Why did you want to get into media?
Oh, okay. So why do I want to get into media? So the answer I'm going to give you right now is the answer that I have managed to articulate over the last 15 years. But 15 years ago, when I decided that this is where I want to be, and my language wasn't so refined. I understood one thing, that as a species, as a community, as a collective, as a civilization, the only thing that sets us apart from everyone else, from every other species, is our ability to transmit information non-biologically. By that I mean that the only way a skill set is transferred from one cat to another or one dog to another is by it transferring it through reproduction to its children. A dog cannot tell another dog what the best way forward is. This allows us to live 1,000 lifetimes in a single lifetime. The fact that you and I are talking to each other from different corners of the earth, and there are going to be listeners who are going to listen to it, not only across space but also across time, is a magical ability that only our species has. And that really snowballs what we can achieve. Now, having understood the power of culture and the power of communication, the strongest way of creating an impact, strongest way of creating meaning, strongest way of getting your ideas out there is by crafting these stories very well, by crafting these sentences very well, by crafting ideas into small capsules. The idea could be something as profound as E is equal to MC square or a Kabir Doha. But I don't have to live in Kabir's time to understand what he meant. I don't have to be Einstein's peer to learn from him. I can learn across time. I can learn across space. I'm literally standing on the shoulders of giants, who themselves stood on the shoulders of giants. So if you really want to cause wide-scale impact in how the way people think and behave and do things, you have to sit on this inflection point, which is mass media.
And where did that? I mean, in many ways, what you're talking about, Zain, is the spread of an idea, right?
Yes.
Like how an idea spreads,
Yes.
and how it takes shape, etc. I mean, it's interesting that you had that inkling so early in life, and I'm saying this with the benefit of knowing what your career, 12 years after that, sort of became. Talk to us a little bit about Memesys, because this story you just told me, I'm hearing it for the first time, right? Even though I've known you for many years, it sounds also eerily similar to another conversation I had with a gentleman called Anand Gandhi, whose worldview seems to be very similar. Talk to us a little bit about Memesys, how it formed, and who are the people behind this organization, and what do you guys do?
Sure. So after I did my first few stints in media, I assisted a filmmaker and writer named Megha Ramaswamy. Learned the ropes of the basics of filmmaking from her, and because I had the privilege of growing up around people of media in Warsaw, where every indie filmmaker hung out, I bumped into Anand, and Anand and I hit off very well. We started talking about everything from cyberpunk to the chess playing Turk to Asimov and Sagan. And at that point, we honestly didn't care that I didn't care that he made films. I didn't know he made films. After knowing him for a few months, I found out he had made this film that was making waves internationally called Ship of Thesis. I joined him as an intern in 2013 to work on the release of the film. I was the person responsible for all the non-standard distribution ideas that Ship of Thesis deployed, and started really learning the ropes and experimenting heavily.
Can you give us an example of some of the non-standard ways in which you distributed that film?
So the film doesn't give you answers. The film teaches you how to ask questions. And so what we did, I would go to colleges, go to the science department, the philosophy department, and ask them tell them I wanted to hold an event for the children, for the students. They would be more than happy to help. So we would get 200 students in an auditorium and show them films from the clips from the film, which were intriguing, which posed questions, which were philosophical treatises, and show them a clip, but not show them the whole clip, not show them the character's worldview, but just the question the character was posing. And then I would play devil's advocate and try to inspire conversation between the students. I would get the students from different expertises, be it literature to philosophy to science, to talk to each other, to challenge each other, to really learn how to question the disparate ways of arriving at an answer philosophically. And each clip would spark a conversation where everyone would be engaged for half an hour, 45 minutes. And we would do that across colleges in the country. At the same time, Kiran Rao was generous enough to come on board to distribute the film and present the film. And UTV came on board as a distribution partner. Now, while UTV was very, very gung-ho with helping, they were also looking at the historic numbers, and they said, okay, maybe these cities are the only cities you should be playing in. And they laid down Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Calcutta, Chennai, if I'm not wrong. And Anand Gandhi is my co-founder, the filmmaker who made Ship of Thesis, said, while your data might be right, I think Ship of Thesis is going to be that breakout film that changes this. So Roy Kapoor said, okay, let's keep it simple. You show us the numbers on our Facebook page. So this is 2013 Facebook, not Facebook what it is right now. You show us interest from all these cities. And if you do, it's my promise that the film will release over there. So he was very forthcoming. Said, okay, let's do it. So we created a portal and we asked people to vote for Ship of Thesis to come to their city. By the time the film finished distribution, we had distributed the film for 7 weeks in 31 cities. And I was behind that social media campaign. Apan Singhal and I were handling that. Then we had another idea. We said, okay, Ship of Thesis is about this paradox that if you take the parts of a ship, take it apart, replace it part by part, and with the old parts make a new ship, which ship is the real Ship of Thesis? Now
is it still the same ship?
Is it still the same ship? And we said, let's have fun with this idea. Now, when you make a film, you shoot a lot of footage, and a small percentage of the footage ends up getting used in the final film, and everything else is just wasted, for lack of a better term. So I spent a lot of time cataloging each and every clip from the film, and we collaborated with this artist collective called Camp on their platform Padma. That's pad.ma. It's still live, and we uploaded 34 hours of Ship of Thesis footage on their platform. heavily meta tagged for people to search it by character, by time of day, by location, by idea, by everything. And we sent it to film schools around the world saying, your students, if they want to learn editing, this is the best way they can do it. They can download all the rushes of the film, 34 hours of it, and make their own shape of thesis.
Wow.
So all these non-standard things were my babies. So I was really I found fertile ground to experiment with idea creation and distribution. And I said, let's do it. It's around the same time that Khushbu and Vinay had just finished shooting a sizable chunk of their documentary film. So that's Khushbu Ranka and Vinay Shukla, two of my co-founders at Memesys. In 2012, they just packed their bags and moved to Delhi because something was happening in Ramlila Maidan. And that seemed very, very exciting to them and to the rest of India. But they had the ambition and the gumption to say, I'm going to be there where it happens and capture it on camera. They went there. They spent 2.5 years there capturing everything that they saw. And they put it together in this beautiful film that really shows you the true face of Indian politics. While the film is called An Insignificant Man, and while it's about Arvind Kejriwal, Yogendra Yadav, and the Aam Aadmi Party, it's actually about Indian politics and what it takes. Yeah. So I ran the crowdfunding campaign for that film, which at that point was the largest crowdfunding campaign in Indian history. We raised $120,000, and the film had a huge release in India a couple of years later.
To put this in perspective, this was also before the Kickstarter and the Keto sort of waves, right? Like you almost created a platform for the crowdfunding as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this is before Keto existed. This is before Visually existed. We had to create our own crowdfunding platform. We created our own crowdfunding platform for one project, ran the project, shut the platform down. I love this thing about Anand Gandhi, right? I just absolutely love the spectrum of his thinking and ideas, because on one end, you have films like Ship of Theseus and creating an organization like Memesys Culture Lab. And on the other end, he's also spent a whole lot of time writing episodes for Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahuti. And he can speak to you about all of these aspects of popular culture in India, isn't it? And the other thing I also wanted to point out is there is this one thing that seems to be continuous fixture in all things that you do as Memesys Culture Lab, which is including the audience as part of the process itself. Whether it is the audience deciding in which cities they want to watch the film, or crowdfunding as an initiative. And later on, many of this will be true in the journey of Shasan itself. I want to get back to the journey of forming Memesys itself. Who are the other founders, besides you and Anand? And what is the dream here? In other words, if Memesys is the answer, what is the question? So in 2015, we had just finished shooting both An Insignificant Man and Tumbad. And we wanted to really create media that we wanted to consume. We didn't find anyone creating media that catered to us as an audience, or media that we would sign off on. We believe that, I can speak for all of us, we believe that the same way you have junk food that is detrimental for the well-being of your body, there is junk culture that is detrimental for your mental well-being. And most modern media is filled with junk culture of violence and sex and jealousy. And just delving on those stories and creating those archetypes is not healthy for the culture on a whole. So we wanted to create a space where an alternate dialogue could take place, which would eventually go mainstream, and an alternate dialogue of progressive, healthy, inventive, scientific thought. So Pooja Shetty, Neil Bhagidar, Khushbu Ranka, Vinay Shukla, Anand Gandhi, and I came together to create Memesys. This was in 2015, and we just wanted to be able to create a space where more creators could join us and tell stories that we felt should be told to the world at large. All of us came from different walks of life, came from different expertises, but we had a similar ambition. Every creator has put out 1 or 2 media pieces in the last 5 years, and it's really wonderful to see that our vision that we set out with, we are seeing it fulfilled. We are seeing a lot of content coming out of India that we are proud of. Right. What's amazing about Memesys for me personally is that it is very difficult to define who you are. Right. I think the closest I will come to is say that you're a creator of culture and subcultures. Right. And I don't even know if that is correct, because
On one hand, you're creating films like these, which is An Insignificant Man, and then Tumbad, which are forerunners in those categories. And on the other hand, you're creating a board game, which is another expression of Memesys. And then I know that you also recently just launched a series called OK Computer, which is very different. And then you're working on mythology and all of that, right? I'm going to go back to that question, that I had asked you a little earlier, which is, what is the change that you want to see? Like, what is success? How does Memesys define success?
That's a very good question. And the answer, I think I would like to give in three parts. The first part is we really want to change the narrative and also change the narrator. By that I mean it is very important to stop having films where the upper caste uh, rich man is the savior. It's very important to stop having films where violence or extrajudicial killing is the answer. It's very important to tell people that being toxic in love is not fine. It's very important to have stories which are inclusive of all castes, races, sexual orientations, genders. So it's very important to change that narrative. We need to represent variety of people on screen, but that also comes from the fact that we need to change who our narrator is. So by changing narrative, it's very important to also create new narrators, to create new storytellers who come from these backgrounds. If the white man keeps talking about slavery, then that's not really a conversation, that's a monologue coming from the oppressor. It's very important to have creators from all genders, sexual orientations, castes, socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to tell their story to the world at large. These stories also are competing simultaneously with the big machinery of Bollywood and the big machinery of Hollywood. So the content also needs to be, for the lack of a better term, sexy. So while it's healthy, it also needs to be fun. It also needs to be tasty. So what we're trying to create is fundamentally the avocado of cinema or the avocado of culture. And at the same time, like the only way our impact will be widespread is if our content is consumed widely, which is also a function of economics. So we need to create content that is massy, that is talking to a billion people and not talking to a small. We don't need to preach to the converted. If the people who already subscribe to ideas of watching our content, then the purpose is half defeated. It's still good to reinforce the ideas, but you also need to get more people into the fold, talk to a wider audience. So it's also a function of economics. So the success looks like a Disney. That's it. So what we are right now, we would like to believe or think of ourselves as a proto Disney. And the third thing, the most important thing, again, not most important, they're all equally important. The third thing is we occupy 1/6 of the world's population, and that's conservative. I'm talking about the Indian subcontinent. I'm talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. We occupy more than 1/6 of the world's population, but we don't occupy an equitable space in cultural dialogue around the world. You and I know the difference between the cultures of Brooklyn and the Bronx, but an American doesn't know the difference between Mumbai and Bangalore. As a matter of fact, they don't even know that Mumbai and Bombay are the same place. So we really need to put culture from the Indian subcontinent front and center on the world stage and occupy. Right now, cultural exchange has also been a monologue. We have been importing culture. We have not been exporting culture.
It's true from an inward looking perspective, right? Like we're talking about Americans knowing Bombay from Bangalore. But today, I think, thanks to Hollywood, most people in urban India can talk very fluently about the Holocaust and what happened there, etc. Well, they might not know anything about the caste situation in Rajasthan or in Tamil Nadu, isn't it? Those stories have never been told.
Exactly. So that's first part of the problem where we need to change the narrative and the narrator, and that's local within India. The Indian media industry is very very unhealthy for its consumers, and I'm going to say that as bluntly as it is. We have toxic film stars pulling off toxic stunts in 300 crore movies, and a 12-year-old girl or 12-year-old boy watching that are learning the wrong things. They're very very impressionable minds. So that needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
But simultaneously, we need to have the cultural clout on a global level. We need to inspire people to. We need to inspire young Indians to stay in India, and we need to inspire creators from around the world to take India seriously. So those are three things that would spell success for us. One is being able to change the narrative locally and create more narrators to create a space for creators from the subcontinent worldwide. And three, scale up operations to be the first major studio out of India internationally.
I completely agree with what you're saying. I think Indian pop culture has been problematic for many decades now. I grew up in Chennai, and while Tamil cinema turned a corner, not now, but in the last couple of decades, with a much more realistic representation of the society that the state is, especially in the last 5 years or so, with the entire stream of Dalits telling the story of Dalits. But for decades, our cinema has been problematic. We normalized stalking in cinema, we glorified it to a point where it was considered very an important part of growing up.
And it's a part of the wooing process. A part of quoting is stalking someone. That is the narrative of hundreds of films across the country.
Yeah, that's true. Great.
So coming to the core subject of today's conversation, which is the extraordinary board game called Shasan. You mentioned that the idea for it came to you when you were making The Insignificant Man. Talk to us a little bit about how it happened.
So Insignificant Man was a breakout hit as a documentary. It released in PVR theaters around the country and it did really well. But it was entirely Khushbu Ranka and Vinay Shukla's baby. I had the privilege of being on the sidelines and watch them do what they do and create magic with that film. There was a lot that they learned and we learned hands-on about modern politics that you cannot learn in a classroom or academically. And we strongly felt that our conversation with the audience about modern politics hadn't finished; it had just begun. So Vinay came to me and asked me, "Then how do we take what we have learned and really show the audience what it feels like to be a modern Indian politician?" And I latched on to the word "feel" because allowing people to feel something, allowing people to experience something firsthand is a very powerful tool. I knew instantly that it had to be something interactive. But I also knew one more thing, that whatever I made had to be an interaction in person. If I made people interact on politics over the internet, then it would be as effective as Twitter, which is not very effective. So...
But I also found it very interesting that the question from Vinay, which inspired you, was a question on how does it feel to be a politician and not a voter, right? Because I think probably that is the shift that we are probably subconsciously talking about, because I could have very easily visualized this as the players in the game being the voters. But somewhere I feel the most critical, probably the most exciting part of all of this is you wanted to put the voter in the shoes of the politician, isn't it?
Exactly, because it's very important. It's very important for you to experience the opposite side in any interaction. For a filmmaker, it's very important to feel like the audience. And similarly, for the voter, it's very important to feel like a politician because then they know how the machine really works. Unless they don't know how the machine really works, they will be taken for a ride time and again. And democracies have been taking people for all kind of ruling systems have been taking the common citizens for a ride for thousands of years, and that needs to change. So you really need to delve into the psyche of the people who are doing what they do and who the people in power. And I think Khushbu and Vinay knew that very, very well, which is why you have this almost first-person perspective to the inside workings of the Aam Aadmi Party in an insignificant manner. So coming back to the game, I knew it had to be in person, and I've been a gamer my entire life. I've played everything, every video game, every mobile game, every board game, not every board game, but I've played hundreds and hundreds of them. And I said, yeah, modern board gaming is perhaps the answer. So I teamed up with 3 young creators who were working at the studio back then, and we started building Shasan. We really didn't know where it would go. We just knew we had to build something that was fun. And one thing led to the other, and now it's a major part of the studio's operations, board gaming.
But why a board game? You created Shasan 4 years back, probably just before games like Catan were making a comeback, especially in markets like India. At that point, wasn't the board game culture on the wane? Intuitively, I probably think so. Why did you think it was important for this idea to be a board game more than anything else?
On the contrary, board gamings have made a huge comeback since 2010. Right now, if I remember the numbers right, the industry as of last year pre-pandemic stands at around $13 billion and is growing at a rate of 18% per annum. Board gaming has really blown up as an industry. People, I think, have gotten tired of looking at screens all the time and want something to do with their friends and family when they meet them. And that's really the market. And it's huge. 80% of all the revenue on Kickstarter raised is for board games. And these are numbers that they have published. But that's, again, we didn't go industry first. I didn't do industry research while deciding to make a board game. It was actually the other way around. We try to not prescribe a medium to our creators. We tell them to think of the story first, think of the experience they want to transmit, and then find the best vessels for it. So I wanted people to feel like a politician, and I wanted them to do it in person. I wanted them to talk about policy issues in person and not politicians. And I thought modern board gaming is an excellent space for that. So I started building a game, and at that point, while I was a gamer and I had been playing modern board games for a few years, I didn't really look into the numbers or how big the market was. I just started building something. 3 months later, we had something that we were very inspired by ourselves. We went out, we put feelers out into the world, and thought that a lot of other people thought likewise worldwide. And that's how the journey began. It started experience first. The container, the medium,
right,
came later.
At this point, and I've seen a very early version of the game, and I know there have been multiple versions of the game till now.
Mm-hmm.
For the uninitiated, Zain, can you walk us through what Shasan feels like as a board game?
Sure.
How is it played?
So Shasan is a political strategy game for 3 to 5 players. Everyone's playing a politician in the middle of a national election. But what differentiates Shasan from other board games that you may have played is that there's no dice roll involved. Every turn, you're asked a policy question. And depending on how you respond to the policy question, and there are 2 responses that you can pick from, you earn resources. Now, these resources are the fundamental tool or the fundamental arsenal that a politician has. That's campaign funds, media attention, crowd on the street, and trust of the people. So you earn these resources, you use them to influence voters, you capture majorities in different states, you trade with your opponents, you horse trade, you hatch conspiracies. So it's basically when 2 or 3 hours of playing the game, you have lived through an entire season of a House of Cards. You have done backroom dealing to thinking about how the policy will be received by the voters you want to capture. If there's a certain group of voters that you think are more conservative, should you be actually giving this answer or responding in some other way? You really start seeing the cracks in the system and start understanding the difference between idealism and politics. And very soon, the players will start having to choose between their ideals and what they must do to win. What the game does, it shows you a mirror and shows you that and makes it very, very clear that if one politician was crooked, it's a politician's fault. If one generation was crooked, perhaps it's their fault. But if politicians are someone we haven't trusted for generation on generation on generation for hundreds of years, perhaps it's the system itself. The system breeds that kind of behavior. Perhaps the system incentivizes that kind of behavior.
Right.
And if we must clean up modern politics, it's not about throwing 3 politicians in jail. It's about changing the system fundamentally. And that's so through an action-packed game where you are shouting and begging and scheming, you walk away with understanding the policy issues in your nation, while simultaneously hopefully understanding what the problems in the system are.
Right. And what I loved about the game when I first played it with you was the fact that there were 2 distinct aspects to this, right? And you spoke about the questions, which actually is the first part of the game, where it is more about the ideology, right? And these are not questions, I'm assuming, which have like a right or a wrong answer. Like, should you build a parking lot by, in the space of a place where there is a playing ground, right? Of a children's playground, right? So a question to this, even very, very well-meaning people can have 2 divergent views on this, right? So what I loved about it is answering questions like this sort of gives you a mirror to your own ideology and helps you understand what an ideology actually is, right? And why it is difficult for it to be a rule. And then the other part of the game, as you progress in the game, is more about how do you succeed as a politician, right? Which probably has nothing to do with ideology at all, which is more a question of winning the game, right? And you could be and what I loved about the game overall is you could be a right-wing bigot and win the game, or you could be a communist or a socialist in your thinking and still win the game as well, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Uh, to me, it seems probably one of the most relevant things right now because, political discourse and mature political discourse is extremely important now more than ever, right? For you, was that one of the motivations as to why you wanted to create this?
Most definitely, and that's a question I ask myself on a regular basis. If a game is going to take 1 year of my life, what am I going to use that 1 year to say? What am I going to talk about? I could have very easily made a game about shooting aliens in space, and that would have been fun, perhaps more fun than Shasan. But is that what I really want to do? If I were to quantify it, and it helps to quantify things sometimes. If I have a career that lasts me for last 40 years, and if I spend 1 year on an idea, am I really going to spend 2.5% of my life talking about shooting aliens in space? Or do I want to do something more worthwhile or something that I think is an important conversation to have? So Shasan was that. I really wanted more people to talk about politics. The next few games we are building, and that applies to every media piece that we try to create at Memesys, is why this story, why us, why now? Why is it relevant? And if it's not relevant, should we actually be spending time and money saying it? So we have the next game coming out is called Shasan Azadi. It's an expansion to Shasan that takes you back to freedom struggles from around the world. You have Indian independence, you have American independence, you have Tahrir Square 2010, you have 1905 Russia, and it really puts you into the shoes of these freedom fighters and creates this beautiful dynamic of cooperation against an external power while still going at each other to make sure that you are the one who comes out on top when you do achieve independence. So it's really a treatise in zero sum and non-zero sum game theory. After which I'm making a game called Zikr, that's Zikr, which talks about how religions are built over time and ages, and how organized religions work, and the relationship between organized religion, the state, and scientific progress. These are stories that I think are very, very important, and I try to find ways of dedicating my time to telling these stories.
Right. And I think it's we should also note the fact that Shasan is not just an Indian game, right? There are many different settings in which you can play the game. I think right from ancient Greece to the US to an Indian setting, there are multiple settings in which you can play the game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Was the global outlook always the way you imagined this product?
The idea that we should have something that is a modular system where study politics from different parts in time and space was always part of the plan. So we have, like you rightly said, current day America, current day India, ancient Rome, the Brexit era, and like that's 2 years ago, and the 2040, the future of humanity. We also created tools and put them online for people to create their own decks for their own countries. So our fans have created decks which are science fiction. They have created decks for countries around the world and are using Shasan as a tool for creating conversation within their own countries.
It's a very offbeat sort of a question, but is one of the things you're thinking of, right? Is it also about, you just spoke about politicians and backstabbing and all of that, right? Like, and then we have a certain image of politicians, isn't it? That they can't be up to any good. And even if they are, we always feel like, okay, there is something suspiciously good about this person, right? There must be something else that is giving way for this. In some way, is Shasan a way of getting people to be excited about politics as a career? Have you ever thought of it that way?
Absolutely. I couldn't. It's wonderful how you can just how you manage to, and in every episode that I've heard of yours, just jump into the psyche of the person you're interviewing. That is exactly what we want to do. We want people to talk about to get into the mind of politician, perhaps Once they get a taste, they get inspired to do something actively. We are actually working on a game show format, and something that we should talk about offline too, where we find the next new big politicians through play, because that is what game is. Gaming, playing is simulating for actual eventualities in a safe space. So you can simulate for policies in a safe space, and then go out there and actually be a little more equipped to enact them.
So getting back to the journey of creating Shasan itself, talk to us a little bit about how it moved from its original version to the scale that you have today, and your journey on Kickstarter, and also about this phase that I heard a lot about, where you asked anybody who was willing, which I think ended up being hundreds, to come over to your office and just play the game with you over coffee or beer. Tell us more about that phase.
Sure. So I strongly, I always come from self-doubt, and I strongly believe that I'm going to fail. So that gives birth to my process. I know that I am going to fail. So if I were to fail, I'd rather fail privately than publicly. So what I do while designing something is play test a lot. Is have people play it again and again and again in closed door settings. So we did thousands of. I'm not even exaggerating. We did thousands of playtests of Shasan. We invited everyone we knew and all their friends to our office and said, "Why don't you come play a game with us?" We didn't have a name yet. We said, "We have just built something. If you have liked our work in the past, just come over." And the response was overwhelming. For the next 3 months, we were hosting 3 to 4 tables of the game every day, sitting there with a notepad, watching them play, writing down each action everyone took, and seeing what behavior the game inspired. And if it was contrary to what we wanted, we would change it. Every time someone picked up their phone in the middle of a gaming session, we'd be like, okay, at that point they got bored. So that needs to change. And we really failed privately. We failed fast and we failed privately, so that once the game is out there, all the kinks in the armor have been ironed out.
What are some of the things you failed fastly in? Like some early decisions you made which were proved wrong? Do you have any examples of that?
There were major changes like the shape of the map and how the zones were laid out to what the 4 ideologues were. Shasan has 4 ideologues, which is the capitalist, the idealist, the supremo, and the showstopper, on how they behaved or what kind of moods they inspired. I always thought about the mood first. What is the mood that I want people to feel while playing the game? Do I want them to feel aggression? Do I want them to feel empathy? At what point do I want them to ebb and flow between the two? And so how the ideologues behaved, how aggressive the supremo was versus how passive the idealist was, would change the behavior that players had on the board. So I wanted the supremo to really feel like the supremo. So I made their powers more aggressive. I wanted the capitalist to really have a free reign on the market and feel like the kings of the world. So we changed the powers to make people actually embody those emotions. There were things, and this applies in any product that you design. You might design a product to be as clean and as simple as possible, but you have to make it idiot proof. People are going to do things that you don't want them to do. You might give them there might be 2 options in front of them. One of them is a logical winning option, and the other one clean and simple. And the other one will take them down a downward slope of defeat, and they will pick that option. So how do you design the game to not handhold, but also direct the people in a very, very straight direction? So we changed power, we changed maps, we went through over 70 iterations for the game.
Wow.
Over a period of a year. And we were changing the game on a daily basis. And my team was very, very patient and resilient with me while I was failing privately. That's Nidhi Shetty, Ayush Asthana, and Mayuresh Paradkar, who really formed the backbone of the game.
And now that you fine-tuned the game, what was the economics of it like? How was the Kickstarter journey for you?
So after we started jumping into the industry, we realized that Kickstarter for these games is huge. And games, if done right, can do very well on Kickstarter. So we reached out to Kickstarter and asked them for advice, and they were very, very kind in response. So a year later, after the game was conceived, we launched a Kickstarter campaign. We had to set up a Delaware corporation to do that because Kickstarter doesn't allow Indian projects. So we had to actually set up a US corporation to run the Kickstarter. And like you rightly said earlier in the conversation, we played on the community. We went community first. We really asked our audience what they wanted, what they want changed, what they liked, what they disliked. We asked them to participate in the campaign in a very, very meaningful way, fundamentally changing how the game is played while the Kickstarter was going on based on their feedback. The Kickstarter did tremendously well. We raised through Kickstarter and Backer Kit, we raised over $500,000, and that was pre-sales. This is before any copy was manufactured or shipped.
Wow.
Then we started getting into manufacturing, and then the pandemic hit. And things were thrown off a little. Timelines were moved around. We were manufacturing in China, and India-China relationships soured. That also was a hit, and we learned a lot along the way. But now we have this community of around 10,000 gamers worldwide who have really enjoyed Shasan. And are looking forward to what we do next. So it's like we're in a carnival. The hundreds of stages, one stage, one magician has pulled off a great trick, and our audience is waiting for the next trick, and it has to be better because you only get that one foot in the door.
I've spoken to a lot of people who've played the game or who've been exposed to it, and what they always tell me is that they love the conversations around the game, right? Whether it is them playing with the family or with friends, etc. And the discourse, especially on the 4 ideologies, the decisions you make, etc. Right? Sometimes you're not the most popular person on the board, and those conversations people remember, and that's the experience that people get out of this game. And to me, I felt that was very, very important because I teach in a lot of colleges, and I remember this one time, especially, I think it was immediately after the Kashmir ruling in the Supreme Court, and I was teaching at a very, very well-known B school, and I asked the students what their point of view on what was happening. Like, of course, it had nothing to do with my course, which was on content marketing. But when I asked them this question, there was this huge reluctance, right? It's almost like I had asked them a question that was taboo, and I found that very, very interesting and also mildly disturbing, right? Because I feel, we are at this stage in our country, especially, where it is very, very important for all of us to be able to talk politics dispassionately, right? Not get worked up by it, but look at it as something that needs to be done so that we can move the country to where we want to move it to, right? So I have a question related to all of this, right? You now succeeded on this enormously, and I know that a lot of people today are looking forward to the game, and you're actively promoting it on different platforms. At any point, were you tempted to have an online version of the game, which could probably be even richer as an experience?
So yes, we are working on digital games, but the same way a graphic novel doesn't always translate to a good film,
right.
A board game doesn't always translate to a good video game. So when you have to think of, when you're changing mediums so drastically, you have to be very careful on how you translate every element. So to do that in Shasan, like you rightly said, Shasan, the fundamental strength of the game is being able to look at your family members in the eye and talk about policy decisions while having this safe space of the game, saying, okay, I'm only saying this for the game, so don't feel bad.
Right.
So and creating that digitally is very, very difficult. So we're trying to work out different modules where conversations can happen, where people can build something that is meaningful at the end of the day, while still engaging in a more interpersonal space like through webcam.
Beautiful, great. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what is coming from the studio Memesys? What are the different things you're working on? What can people look forward to, even within Shasan itself or outside?
Sure. I am actively working on a few games. I'm also actively working on getting Shasan to more and more hands. Like I said earlier, it doesn't make too much sense to to preach to the converted. Shasan is an expensive game, and I'm very, very aware of that. And it's very important that college kids, that younger people, that people from who don't form the elite of India also get to experience the conversation that Shasan inspires. So we're coming up with a version of Shasan that is more affordable, that is the essential experience of Shasan without any compromise in gameplay. So that's launching next month. We also have something called Shasan Azadi, which is Shasan but freedom struggles and semi-cooperative. So you're cooperating and fighting each other simultaneously.
Right.
Vinay Shukla is coming up with his next film later this year or early next year. It's a documentary. Vinay Shukla was the co-director of An Insignificant Man with Khushbu Ranka. He's coming out with his solo directorial. He's been shooting it for the last 3 years. I can't tell you what the subject matter is right now. That's for Vinay to reveal to the world. But I can promise you it's going to blow everything else out of the water.
Brilliant.
We did OK Computer earlier this year. It was very warmly received. It premiered at Rotterdam International Film Festival. Pooja and Neera are working on something that's really exciting. And Anand is working on his next film and a TV series simultaneously, where we're taking the experience of Ship of Thesis, which is inspiring people to ask questions, but going out to a wider audience and making it more appealing, more sexy. So Anand's working on that. We're also working on something called on a large high fantasy universe. The idea is to export Indian mythology to the world at large. So we're working on something that is simultaneously a game, a film series, and a book series. So that is the magnum opus we're working on right now.
Brilliant. And now I know why you used a Disney as an analogy earlier, because I honestly can't think of anything else that sort of matches what you are trying to do in terms of ambition. One final question around Shasan itself. It is an expensive investment. I think the full version of the game costs around 7,000 or so. But I also know that you're planning to launch, or you've just launched, a lot of retail versions which are much more affordable, which is around 3,000 or so. If one is planning to buy the game, where should they go?
So it's online on our website in India and the US on buyshasan.com.
Got it.
So it's available there. We're going to be stocking the more affordable version over there too. We have been making sure each customer is taken care of personally, and we're making sure we scale everything also. We're also making sure that the experience is very, very safe and warm. So we've done things in Shasan that are not standard in gaming parlance. And I'm going to take a segue to just talk about a couple of small things that we have done. Is that in Shasan, in every question, we have added trigger warnings or PG ratings. So you can play Shasan, but if you have any lived traumas that you don't want to talk about, but the policy questions do talk about that, you can just look for a symbol on the card and take them out. If you're playing with children that you want to not exposed to certain ideas, you can take that out too. So the idea is to make Shasan widely available to a wider audience. We are working on something that 8-year-olds can also play. Brilliant. Because it's important to differentiate between politics and policy. We need to focus on policy and not the backstabbing, horse trading, lying that politicians do. What is the policy? What are the rules that our civilization lives by? That's what politics should be. And I want to bring the focus back on that.
Right.
Zain, I had one question for you, which I wanted you to answer from your unique vantage point. And that is about the popular culture in India itself at this point. Today, if you look at social media, we're probably going towards a phase where it's quite possible for us to have 5 or 6 different platforms with over 100 million people, which is very, very different from how social media landscape in India was even 5-6 years back. And, today, if you look at OTT, there is a proper crossover of cinema directors, cinema creators into this space. For example, I was watching Mayor of Easttown recently, and I was thinking what a waste it would have been if it was just a film. They wouldn't have been able to explore so many layers of what it ultimately was. And the same is true with series like Family Man, isn't it? And gaming is on the rise in India in a way that we've never imagined a few years back. And then you spoke about board games and how it is coming back as a popular culture. And you spoke about board games and how it is coming back in many different ways. How do you see popular culture in India in its present shape?
So I'm simultaneously disillusioned and optimistic. Don't ask me how that works in my head, but that's how it is.
But explain definitely.
So the fundamental difference between education and entertainment is is how meaningful and accessible it is. If education is entertaining, if education is accessible, it's entertaining, it's entertainment. And if entertainment is meaningful, then the lines completely blur. What we're doing right now is creating popcorn that is full of fat, largely. There are some creators that are using these new tools to create really, really amazing dialogue that couldn't have existed before. And you've pointed some examples out, and that's refreshing. That's new. I couldn't have seen so many different stories being told in India 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I couldn't have seen it's possible for a kid in Gorakhpur to have great insights on politics and start a relevant conversation with 2 million people. So while I think there's a lot left to be done and a lot of the stories need to upgrade, I think that there's great opportunity. Indian media is just so heavily gated by these gatekeepers who are looking at quarterly returns and not cultural health. And they keep giving us responses like the audience won't get it. My response to the audience not getting it is if you keep a child in the second grade for 8 years of their life and then ask them to give a board exam, of course they won't get it. You have to keep upgrading content. You have to stop second guessing your audience. You have to stop thinking of your audience as idiots and treat them with respect and not talk down to them. And most major spaces in India, most major creators in India seem to not want to take that risk. But we are a very, very small film industry, for example. And that is just the myopia of the industry. We have failed to export any film internationally except to the NRI pockets worldwide. And in our myopia, we have also made so people have been more happy to own 10% of a 100 rupee pie than to own 4% of a 1,000 rupee pie. The Indian cultural pie can be huge. It can be an industry that is celebrated worldwide. But instead of being caricatured with song and dance around trees,
Right. I feel you've been a little too critical of this
harsh.
of the space, but because I watch a lot of cinema from South India and from Marathi and from Bengal, and I feel we have
And Kerala is doing some great work.
yes,
For example.
Kerala is Tamil Nadu is Marathi has
Marathi
always
cinema
been
is also doing some great work,
phenomenal
yes.
work.
Marathi theatre has been doing great work for a while now.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the things
The
that
mainstream.
make
No, I get it.
what can create impact on large scale. I'm talking about just fundamentally that.
So true.
And over there are breakout hits. There are films which really do challenge the norm over there, but they are few and far apart.
I get that. But just to clarify, you're not talking about creating something for the 1%, right? You're talking about making sure the quarterly returns are awesome, and at the same time, the popcorn is not fatty, isn't it? That's your mission, if I understand that right.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that everyone is consuming the best quality of cultural content. And that is possible. That is very, very possible. Case in point, The Matrix talks about Baudrillard and philosophy, but at the same time packages it into this high stakes action film.
Yeah.
It is possible. People have done it in the past.
Yes.
And we need to do that repeatedly again and again.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Zain, we usually close the episode by asking our guest what he or she is reading, watching, listening to. And in your case, I'm going to drop in another category of playing as well. So give us a few recommendations.
So I have been fascinated with the science communicator, this scientist named Robert Sapolsky. His latest book, Behave, is really eye-opener. So that's something I would recommend to everyone. What I'm playing a bunch of things right now. I've been enjoying lighter games like Splendor, but also sinking my teeth into the Hitman series.
Nice.
Which is the weirdest of puzzle games. It's a puzzle game masquerading as a shooter.
Right.
So that's something that's been taking a lot of my time up in terms of gaming.
And anything you're listening to these days, which is interesting?
A few podcasts here and there, but I'm not much of a music person. To be very honest, I can't concentrate when I'm listening to music.
Of course.
So I have zero appetite when it comes to music.
What pods do you listen to?
So I listen to Vineet and your podcast from India, and those are the only two Indian podcasts I listen to. I've heard a few of Nilesh Mishra's podcasts.
Right.
But 99% Invisible is amazing for a design podcast.
It is one of my most favorite ones.
Yeah. Stuff You Should Know is a fun podcast. Small snippets of insight. It's and also Freakonomics audio, which I really enjoy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of science communication and
right. I can't wait for the Memesys podcast. I think that I will pay to listen to.
So we always plan that and we never really do it. We have put sort of 2 episodes out on Anand's YouTube channel, which is basically 2 conversations. But a podcast is something that we have been thinking of for a while, but we never really have the discipline to sit down and do it regularly.
Excellent. That's for an offline conversation we'll have after this. Right. Zain, thanks so much for your time and all the luck for this extraordinary game called Shasan and everything else you guys are working on. Can't wait.
Thank you so much, Karthik. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik, that's Karthik with an H, on Twitter, and Filter_Koffee, that's Coffee with a K, on Instagram.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsor on the network this week, Credentia. Thank you so much for making this possible. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus was joined by actress Shreya Pilgaonkar to talk about her career in acting. On Begin the Journey, Ashish Vidyarthi lists down the modern concepts of friendship and how one can choose the right friend circle in life on Begin the Journey. On The Habit Coach, Ashton Doctor was joined by Aisha Bilamoria to talk about running and developing an athletic mentality. Farhad and Sunitra are joined by LGBTQ workplace advocate Suresh Ramdas to discuss the new normal in queer relationships on GBCD. On Tere Mere Raste, Keshav Chaturvedi takes us to the riverbanks of Banaras and describes the soulful mornings to us. And finally, on the Positively Unlimited podcast, Chetna Chakravarti takes the fear out of the word responsibility. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear friends. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. Life, as you know, is a journey. And you and I, travelers, how can we celebrate this travel? I have a podcast for you, Begin the Journey. I share stories and moments from my life. Do tune in every Monday to listen to my podcast on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. Cheers.